everyone. I'm Vivian, and I'm helping Newchip program companies in fundraising and international expansion. In today's panel discussion, we're going to talk about a trend that's going on for a while, but has been accelerated during the pandemic because of remote working and also other reasons. And our two panelists here today have already been part of the trend that is leaving California. I'm pleased to have Jonathan and Josh join me in today's panel discussion. Jonathan is an early stage investor who used to live in LA and recently moved to Austin, Texas. And Josh is a seasoned entrepreneur who lived in San Francisco and New York for quite some time. And he's also our Newchip Accelerator program graduates, and he also moved to Texas as well. So today we're going to hear their stories and experiences. And before we get started, Jonathan and Josh, can you each give our audience a self-intro about you, maybe your background and also your company and where you live now? Why don't we start from you first, Jonathan?
Yeah, perfect. So I'm with Expert Dojo. We're an early stage investment group. Average first check for each company is $100,000. We've done a little over 100 in deals within the last 2 years. So last year we were one of the most active firms in the US, actually. We are industry agnostic and geographically agnostic. As you said, I'm headquartered in Texas now, but our head office is in Los Angeles still. We have investments all across the US and abroad. Industry agnostic, though I tend to focus a little more on B2B software and enterprise tech. Each company we invest in goes through a program similar to other accelerator programs, but a little more focused on the growth side of things. So really focused on building your KPIs, driving traction forward, and then we layer investment capital on top of that to really help the companies grow as quickly as possible. We've done deals with most of the major VC firms in the United States, always looking for new companies, and we're actively looking to invest in about 30 more by the end of this quarter.
Thank you, Johnson. What about you, Josh? Can you give us a brief intro?
Sure. Thanks, Vivian. Well, I am living in Texas, as you mentioned, now Allen, Texas. I've just moved to, and our company's headquartered in Plano, Texas. The company's called Aiden Technologies, and I founded it in May of 2020 after leaving a career in private equity, where I was the CTO of Hellman and Friedman. Prior to that, I was both a CIO in healthcare for 7 years for the New York Foundling in New York, but through my own consulting business, which I've had for over 25 years, called Business Technology Partners. I've been an entrepreneur since 1 year and 8 months after college. Founded my company in 1997. I was almost 20 years in Entrepreneurs Organization in New York. I was on both the New York chapter board and then the global board in strategic alliances. And I've both done entrepreneurship myself and also fostered entrepreneurship in other people, mentored many entrepreneurs, both in business in New York and in student entrepreneurship at various universities that EO has partnerships with. And so after doing a few years in both healthcare and then financial services as a CIO and CTO, I really felt like it was kind of my passion and my calling to do another company. I came across a great technology, which I'm happy to share with everybody, but basically it's an AI platform. Aiden is AI for desktops and enterprise networks. And it uses AI and natural language processing to scan a computer in under 2 seconds or thousands of them at a time, figure out exactly what they need from a compliance perspective to be in compliance with both company standards, organizational best practices, and cybersecurity standards and best practices, and then autonomously builds the computers into that desired state configuration with no engineering labor required. It's a huge labor savings and a cybersecurity posture enhancement. That's basically the story on me. I also have 3 children and a wife, and my father lives with us here in Allen, Texas, and we're all doing very well.
Thank you for your sharing. Very informative background information. And my first question is, during the pandemic, as you know, that more and more companies, including big corporations and startups, are leaving the traditionally so-called tech hubs and moving to places like Texas and Florida. And so you both lived in California and then left. And when you look back now, what or when was the first time you think about leaving California? And was there any particular incident that led to the decision to leave? So we'll probably start with you first, Josh.
Yeah. So, I mean, my wife works for a company called Learfield IMG College. They're headquartered here in Plano, Texas, but she was working in Marin County when I was the CTO at Hellman and Friedman, and I'm working in San Francisco. And they first approached her about the possibility of relocating before about 6 months before the pandemic. They were interested in her moving. I was still working at Hellman and Friedman. I hadn't resigned yet. We talked about it. We did think it was interesting, and we planned a trip here to go house hunting in the Plano area in February of 2020. We did do that trip. We came here. It was probably about a week before the pandemic hit the news. And so right after that, we talked about it. I had resigned at H&F. My last day was in January 31st, 2020. And I was starting to build the team for Aiden. And we just decided, I'm running a software company. I could work from my laptop. I could do investor calls from the beach if that's what I needed to do. And we could have gone, we talked about going to Cabo San Lucas for a while or something. But with my father and everything else, we wanted a place that would be very stable and good for our child. We have a 6-year-old. I have 2 older kids as well, but our 6-year-old, we were really concerned about where she was going to be brought up and go to school and all those kinds of things. So public school system was, obviously an interesting benefit here in the Texas area. And, it just seemed like a really good thing for cost of living. And it was a motivational thing for my wife's employment to be closer to the corporate headquarters and the company's CEO. So it just, a lot of factors came together at the same time. And it's like the universe is telling us we should make this move. We didn't know we were going to be part of a giant trend. We just thought it made a lot of sense for us.
Thanks. What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my story somewhat echoes Josh's story. So my wife is actually from Texas. So we used to go back here all the time. We constantly saw it and just saw how much easier things were here. Like we lived in LA, and she said, always tell me, like, going to the grocery store is a whole like ordeal. Like you have to worry about like, where are we going to park when we get there? It's going to be 45 minutes in traffic to get there. And it was like, we lived like 2 miles from a grocery store. It took us 45 minutes to get there and 45 minutes to get back. And we were in the middle of downtown LA, and then COVID hit, and we were paying a crazy amount of money for an apartment in LA. And then she kept showing me, like, look at this house we could buy in Texas. Like, this is an amazing house. And it's just disgusting the amount of money we were spending on rent in LA when I look back on it. Like our rent was 3 times more than what her parents pay for a 6-bedroom, 2-story house in Texas. It was just kind of, it made so much sense. And then once COVID hit, I mean, I was already doing all of our investments worldwide. So I was always traveling, doing things. And then I was very rarely in the office in LA. Like I would be there maybe once a week. So I was basically just thinking, like, why am I here if I can be anywhere in the world? I travel most of the time anyway, but even during COVID, I can't even travel. So all my calls are on Zoom, even if I'm in LA, except I have a place where I can actually live if I'm in Texas. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now, so my wife works for Disney and her whole company's all remote now too. So we both kept our jobs in California, are living in Texas full time. And it was really just a no brainer because the quality of life out here was just so much better. And I think a lot of people have seen that now just because everything in California just was getting a little bit crazy during COVID, and we saw how much easier it was to do things here and just live a normal life here, and still take into account like the restrictions with COVID, but we were still able to have just more comfort here day to day, I think.
I agree with you, John. Like we got a much bigger house for about 1/5 the price of if we had bought our house in Oakland. We were renting because we were only there for 2 years, but we looked into buying it, and we were was possibly interested in selling it. And it was a little smaller than this, plus didn't have any outdoor space whatsoever. We were in the Rockridge area, Rockridge Hills, in Oakland, and I was working in San Francisco. Traffic was a bear everywhere. My wife was commuting, roughly 50 miles each way or something like that to Marin. And, I was having to deal with the Bay Bridge going into San Francisco. I mean, this is just such a better quality of life. Plus, for COVID, I mean, we have a pool. I mean, at a time when nobody wanted to go to a community pool or a community gym or anything like that and work out or, swim or sweat next to someone else, we have our own pool, and we could just kind of control our experience. And, this wouldn't have been possible in the Bay Area for sure. Not at the level of existence and quality of life that we have here. It's just been perfect during the pandemic.
So I understand that, Josh, because you are the CEO of a company, so your family is also very supportive of like moving to Texas because your wife also has a career change as well. So what about your team? Like, how are they coping with the change that you're moving to another state?
That's a great question. Well, the company was kind of born in COVID. So we have people in California. I'd say the majority of our team is in California. We have about 20 people working with the company now. A couple in Ohio, someone here in Fort Worth, interestingly enough, that we just recruited recently, but it wasn't intentional, just the right skills happened to be in Fort Worth. And we have a couple people in New York. So, we're kind of nationwide, I guess you could say, for a small business. And I'm the only one now, and my executive assistant, she's here. Now we just hired someone in Plano. And we might hire another person here in Plano to work in the office soon. But because we were born during the pandemic, everybody has worked like this panel discussion. Right? Everybody's working on video conferencing. We use Microsoft Teams and Zoom and a variety of collaboration tools and applications, Asana for project management. And, we don't really feel the need to be in the office. We do crave socialization in the company and getting together. So we run, Wednesday evenings, we have like an all company meeting, and it's usually like an hour meeting and then followed by another hour of kind of like happy hour and social time. So everybody can get to know each other. But we're also planning to get together now that the pandemic is, say, somewhat easing, right, and getting under control. We're planning an all company get together, which will be the first time everybody in the company has met each other in person, probably in the first week of October, the last week in September, for our Q4 planning session. We're planning to do that live and in person. It's a secret location. I'm not telling anybody yet, but it is in the United States in a more resorty destination area. We plan to do some fun stuff. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, one thing I would say on that too, like I think we made over 90 investments last year. I met one person in person that entire time, and that was just because they were in Austin and they were like, "Hey, can we grab a cup of coffee and meet in person for the first time?" And so that was out of every investment we've made, I haven't met anybody. So it's all been just, and I think a lot of other investors have felt that same sentiment of like, why do we need to be in the same city right next to each other so we can meet in person when I don't have to wait 2 hours in traffic to meet somebody now. I can walk from my bedroom to my office, and just, that's where I meet everybody now. I do all my meetings there. Everything's more efficient. I think a lot of other investors have really seen like, it makes more sense that they can be global now versus just they're only going to invest in Silicon Valley based companies. And I think a lot of that has changed with almost every major VC firm is now all over the US firm now versus just in Silicon Valley or California. I mean, there are some who are still regional, but they usually have partners everywhere now.
We just raised our round. We actually closed the round this Saturday while I was in the middle of moving. It was moving day for me. We've been at it for a year. We did a pre-seed round with a SAFE, and I'm sure Jonathan understands and has been part of all those things. But I didn't meet a single investor in person. We've got over 20 investors. Our goal was 2 million. We're tallying it today. We're over 2.5. It's almost like 2.6. Might even come in at 2.7. I think we have one or two stragglers coming in with a couple of smaller investments. Our lead investor essentially is a company called Rightside Capital Management in the Bay Area that really gave us the largest contribution to our round. And, all of this was done over Zoom. Every single meeting was a Zoom meeting. And, we exceeded our goal. I'm super excited about all that, but it's also amazing. I was thinking about how much of that investment capital did we probably preserve because I wasn't traveling and on the road. Just the travel expenses associated with it. We raised from people in every area. We have people in the Midwest, people in California, people in New York. If I had to do all that by travel, we would have spent $30,000 to $50,000 just on travel expenses for me. So, And the efficiency of my time. I was able to have sometimes, 4 or 5 meetings in a single day, both client sales calls and investor meetings. And they could be all over the country, some international, without me having to leave my desk in my comfortable home at the time in Plano, Texas. So it was, an ideal way to raise early stage capital in my mind, and far more efficient than if this had been done in the traditional, kind of paradigm where you always travel to see every investor in person.
I think you guys both answered one of my questions, but we will get to that point again. So we talked a lot about the benefits of working remotely and leaving California because of the life quality got improved. So if you are, so let's say things perhaps from another perspective. What would you say are the top challenges of leaving California? Like, what are the challenges you are facing now, that things you couldn't get, or things that was made more difficult after leaving California?
I'm having a hard time thinking of something. I'm not you, Jonathan. It's more difficult here. Registering my cars was easier. Getting city services and utilities and trash collection was easier. Just getting internet, anything for our home, that was all easier. Getting our company set up was easier. We're using a WeWork office here, but it was simple and straightforward to get things going. The biggest challenge that I can think of is just sort of like, I was always bi-coastal. I was New York or California. I grew up lifeguarding and being around the ocean. I spent 8 years as a lifeguard on the beach in New Jersey when I was younger. I said to my father the other day, we were in a beautiful park flying kites with my daughter. There's a line of trees. And I said, Dad, if I could go over that line of trees and on the other side was an ocean, I think this would be perfect. And that's really the biggest thing that I miss. I miss some of the outdoor activities that I used to do, because I did kiteboarding and I did surfing and beach volleyball, but they have that here. They have plenty of nets. In terms of challenges to get life set up, I really am having a hard time thinking of one. Everything's been easy to access and get.
Yeah, I think the only issues I've ran into here are issues that everyone else is experiencing around the world right now. Like, I think the biggest issue for me here is that before when I used to come to Texas and do a lot of things here, I always felt like the tech community was not quite as tight as it was in Silicon Valley and in LA and even in New York. I feel like those areas had really strong communities. And I do think there are communities here, but it's a little different, I would say, and not quite as robust as it is in the bigger cities. But I think that's changing. And I think through COVID, it's just been hard to gauge what the community here looks like. And I think community as a whole has just suffered everywhere, really, even including back in LA and in San Francisco, just because you're not able to meet people in person. And I think you can still establish good relationships through Zoom, but there is something different when you meet people in person. But I don't think that's a problem in Texas versus LA, though. I think that's just a problem that we're experiencing in the world right now, is that how do you form communities of people? And I don't mean relationships between interpersonally, but just with groups. Like, how do you form a strong group of people when you're not actually with a lot of people? It's difficult to have a good tech community when there's not a community to build.
I'm interested to see how that goes. That's not going to be that hard, but I don't know yet, John, because I only lived here during COVID. But Capital Factory is here. We just got an investment from Congress Avenue Ventures as one of our investors. They're here and they do a lot of tech investing, and there's a ton of others I spoke to along the way. We have some, relationships from my days at Hellman and Friedman. Like, friends of mine in TPG are here. They're local in the Fort Worth and Dallas areas. 6th Street companies here as well. So, there's a lot of investment community and tech community here. Tomorrow, I wish I could tell you how this went already, but I'll tell you after tomorrow. I'm actually attending the first in-person event that I've attended. The DFW Technology Summit 2021 is happening here in Dallas. And you could do it virtually or in person now. So I'm actually going in person because I want to meet people in the tech community, but that event's going forward. in person. So from what I understand, a lot of people registered to go in person. So again, I haven't done a lot of that yet. I've had like 3 or 4 business lunches since COVID started. And there are some tech community people here. DataBank is here. And my friend is the CEO of DataBank. I've had lunch with him. There is the PGA headquarters is moving to the area where I'm in. I think they're moving up in Prosper and they're just coming in. Toyota's headquarters is here. There's a whole bunch of tech companies here. I've seen easily a dozen tech company names on the sides of buildings that I recognize well. So I don't know. I'm like I said, optimistic that I'm going to find a tech community and meet a bunch of people over the next year as things, fully open up and people get back to going out together.
I think you both mentioned that actually the tech communities and also the fundraising experience after you moving to Texas. But I read this article saying that startups are leaving Silicon Valley, but VCs are finding no alternative because despite companies are leaving to different places, there's no single city that's comparable to Silicon Valley where 40% venture dollars are deployed. So do you think that fundraising become harder outside of like the traditional centers? I know that Josh, you just mentioned that you think it's more efficient and easier, but do you see other people are experiencing the same, or they do have challenges or finding fund for startups, and how are they dealing with that? So to you, first question to you, Josh.
Yeah, I don't know that well because I don't know a lot of other entrepreneurs who are raising money here in Texas. I do know one who has a company that makes like sensor technology and they're doing a lot of work with the military. They seem to have a pretty good access to capital through some of the local Texas groups. But I don't have a large enough sample size to really know if it's harder here. There were certainly tech focused investors that we spoke to that prefer to invest outside Silicon Valley. So I actually heard that as a thesis, which is interesting because I think that companies in the Silicon Valley area are getting overhyped and overvalued. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I can say we had no trouble raising our round and exceeding it, but I also think we have a phenomenal team and a phenomenal product that is truly unique in the market. So, and a very timely product because we patch computers at a time when everybody's worried about cybersecurity, right? And how not keeping your computers patched is opening people to vulnerabilities and ransomware and everything else. So we're really hot right now, but I don't have a strong sense for other kinds of technologies, at this stage in the Texas area or outside the Silicon Valley in general. I do know that if you're hiring for tech talent, there is a ton of tech talent and access to people. You can't go to a coffee shop without being surrounded. When I lived there, it's true. And overhear 12 conversations about technology and startups and things that people are doing. But at the same time, it's so overdone in some ways that it feels like noise sometimes, and you don't know who's real and who's not. There's almost like a lack of authenticity I sometimes feel in some of those conversations at the bar and in the coffee shop. So, again, it's really hard to say, but I haven't experienced that myself or heard of anyone who's experiencing a challenge with raising capital outside Silicon Valley.
Jonathan, what's your take on this? Do you find your daily routine changed after you moving to Austin, or it's basically the same?
Yeah, I mean, I work with hundreds of companies, so I do deal with this quite a bit. I don't know if it's become harder. I think it's just become different because, like I was saying, the investors in Silicon Valley are moving outside of that area. I do think that being in Silicon Valley was very helpful before because, like you said, you can't go to a coffee shop without meeting 10 entrepreneurs, and almost everyone in San Francisco, their job revolves around tech in some capacity. Like you don't go to Silicon Valley and like I always tell my family, like back home, like my family doesn't even know what I do for a living. Like they don't know what a venture capitalist really is because it has nothing to do with their lives. That doesn't happen in San Francisco. Like every single person knows what VC is. They know all about the tech side of things. They know what it is. And Texas has, I'd say, more real life people who don't just focus on technology and investment and how to build their business. They actually have people who do like real jobs. Like you've got people who work in construction and oil and gas and other kinds of investments, alternative investments, whereas Silicon Valley is one specific area. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of the tech that's really worked there. But I do think a lot of the investors now are looking outside of there because the same issues we were running into, that things have gotten so expensive there that a lot of the good tech talent has moved into other places. A lot of the big major software companies have opened up branches in other places like LA, like Austin. And I think a lot of the talent is moving with them. So really what they want to see is that good software talent. And I think that's what Silicon Valley had in a lot of, is that there were so many good software engineers and people who knew how to build stuff. And that's because they were all working for Google and Facebook and all those other companies that are in Silicon Valley. But when those companies start moving abroad, they're really able to build that tech talent in other places too. And I think with places like Austin having that homegrown tech talent, people that know how to develop products properly, and really smart people that have worked with large enterprise companies, I think that will change things more than anything else will. And the dollars will follow wherever the companies are. Nobody in Silicon Valley is going to scoff at a company because they're based in Austin, but they see a huge billion-dollar opportunity still. They don't care where they're from as long as it's a good opportunity. And if they do, they're probably not going to be around very long because their LPs are not going to be very happy with them. So the money follows wherever the good companies are. And I think that they'll follow the talent, which is hopefully going to be in areas like this very soon. And I think already is here.
Thanks. So the next question, maybe perhaps from a founder's perspective, Josh, what would you say are the best things about Plano? Maybe 3 best things you think from an entrepreneur or from a founder's perspective. What are the best things about Plano?
Well, for one thing, I think just geographically, it's on this, Dallas-Fort Worth North Corridor, I like to call it, right? It's really extended DFW Metro. So you can be in Dallas within 23 minutes. You could be in Fort Worth within 35 minutes or 40 minutes. Airport within 25 minutes at DFW, which is a very easy in, easy out central hub to get anywhere. So I, really feel like location wise, it's fantastic. We have a lot of companies moving here, as I mentioned earlier. You've got companies like the PGA, Tesla, I know, moved to Austin, but we have other companies like Toyota that have come into headquarter here in the Plano, Frisco area. So Plano, Frisco, Allen, McKinney, Prosper, this whole area that's north of Dallas, Fort Worth is really exploding with activity and businesses moving in here and economic incentives for people to move here. So they don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. The second thing I would say about it is weather. I mean, the weather is generally really good. So getting around is, you all saw that we had a big winter storm and it was kind of the first thing that's happened in a long time. Our office and my house did not lose power or water, so everything was fine. But obviously a lot of people in Texas suffered during the winter storm. But other than that one storm, and when I think comparably back to other disasters, I worked in the data center business for a long time, designing data centers. This is a huge issue for companies on the East Coast and the West Coast. And, disaster recovery programs have to be so robust and significant and tested. I'm not saying you don't need one here too. Of course you do. But the likelihood or the sort of intervals between disasters are so much more spread out. I think that this is a phenomenal place in terms of the weather. And I think for a third one, I would just say the economic opportunity, right? You have the ability to hire talent and really, really great people for reasonable salaries and prices, right? And the salaries you're paying people enable them to have a quality of life so they can be focused when they come to work and relaxed when they're home, not under constant stress, feeling like they're in the rat race that they do in the East Coast or the West Coast. I mean, I feel like whether you're in New York or Miami, or you're in LA, San Diego, or San Francisco, you're in a constant struggle. It's like people say it's all about the struggle. Well, does it need to be? Or can employees be more productive if they have quality of life at home and peace of mind, and they can come to work and be focused and productive, and the company can afford to pay those salaries easily? I think there is a big benefit to the economic overall status that you get in the Plano area.
Well said. So Jonathan, from investor perspective, what would you say are the best things of Austin?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the close proximity to the rest of the U.S. It is nice. It's much easier. Not that I've had to travel a lot lately, but when travel does open up, hopefully, I'm assuming trips to New York are going to be much easier. Going to Chicago is going to be a lot easier versus a trip to New York for me in LA that's an entire day. So you're usually doing a red eye if you want to do any kind of work in one day. So I think that's a great thing just for me, how much I travel. I'm usually gone 3 or 4 days a week at least. So that'll be nice when things open up. I do think that the software talent is much cheaper here. So finding developers is always an important thing. And I always tell people, like, San Francisco is so expensive. Like, it's ridiculous when you think about it comparison to the rest of the US. I mean, people making 6 figures there, I mean, it's a good salary in most of the US. It's not, doesn't go that far in San Francisco. Like, you're still paying $3,000-$4,000 a month for an apartment that's not that nice usually. And so it's just a different quality of life here when you think about that. And like what you can find for $4,000 a month in Texas is just, it's phenomenal. I mean, you can find mansions for that here. And it's just kind of funny that people in San Francisco, I think a lot of people don't realize what they could get other places, or they just don't care. I mean, I was born and raised in California, and it's just amazing to see that when you don't look outside of there, you don't really realize how much better it could be in other places, just because the quality of life is just so much better. And the stress with, like, traffic puts so much stress in my life, I think, in LA, especially, that you plan your entire day around how long it takes to get places. And it's just amazing. Like, I worked in Santa Monica, but I lived in LA. So that's an hour and a half drive most days. So, and I did that every day, twice a day. So I would take the morning commute there. It took me 90 minutes, and then getting back was usually 2 hours, because it usually took longer than that. So I'm usually planning 3.5 to 4 hours of just driving every day. So that was like, I usually would just stay at work longer, because then the longer I wait, the better traffic gets. So I'm working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at least, and then driving home 2 hours. So just everything is so much easier here. Like, you just get home in 20 minutes, 10 minutes. And if you're driving 30 miles, it takes 30 minutes usually here.
And people think that's a lot of traffic, right, Jonathan? Like, people here complain about that. It's a lot of traffic today. It's like,
yeah, traffic to them is, I can't go as fast as I want to go. Like, traffic to me is like, we're not moving. We're just stopped here. That doesn't happen here at all. So it's kind of amazing. I mean, it does happen sometimes, obviously, but it's just nothing like traffic I'm used to anyway.
Yeah, I remember days in New York getting stuck in the Holland Tunnel or something like that, where, like, if there's the littlest bit of a traffic impairment, right? Like one little police incident or something, not even a big one. I'm talking like a 2-car pileup, right? Like, it'll set your commute back like an extra 2 hours. So now your 2-hour commute's a 4-hour commute. Mm-hmm. I had that in New York, and same thing. I mean, the Golden Gate and the Bay Bridge. The Bay Bridge is worse than the Golden Gate, but they're both bad. I mean, there's just nothing like those two areas, New York and San Francisco, for traffic and commuting, particularly if you're doing it by car. But even with public transportation, the BART or the subway or the PATH train getting across New Jersey or something, it's challenging. It's challenging. And it is detrimental, I think, to your overall personal well-being and health and fitness and everything else. And I did the same thing Jonathan did. I would come in really early or go in late. Like, if you couldn't get in early, then you just wait and go in late. Mm-hmm. And then you're working super late. Like, I used to have nights where I'd stay in the office till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night to avoid, I hated the commuting traffic on the way home. And I feel like here that isn't even something that I have to worry about at all.
And rush hour traffic is really rush half-hour traffic at the most. Like, it's over at 5:30, and then you're smooth sailing the whole way home. So I love that.
They keep adding infrastructure. I mean, I'm looking around at what's going on here. They keep expanding highways, making them bigger and newer and nicer. You drive along, like especially up to Prosper, and you see telephone poles in the ground that look like a modern telephone pole structure, not the old ones that are like bent over as you get closer to Dallas. And they're so new, you can still see the shine on the side of the telephone poles. The sheen on the metal is still there. It's like, it's quite unbelievable how modern the infrastructure is compared, and considering Texas is such a vast state, they've done an amazing job here, as opposed to a lot of other places I've visited in the United States, not just the major cities on the coasts.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Austin adapts to the large influx of people that are moving there right now, because I do think that the infrastructure is starting to fall behind as far as like just the traffic is getting worse there. And I think there's a lot of people that were born and raised in Austin are starting to get a little upset that there are so many people moving there and finding out that it is a cool city to be in. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the infrastructure there starts to handle this influx of people. Because I think that they are going to have to start putting a lot more resources into that versus places like Dallas, where it's much, much better infrastructure at the moment for the amount of people they have.
Some of the people I know that were born and raised in Austin were there when there were 300,000 people in Austin.
Yeah.
And now it's what? Almost 2 million, right?
Yeah, it's something crazy like that now. I mean, it's becoming just as, I mean, it's going to be just as large as Dallas soon. But I mean, it's just it doesn't have this. Like Dallas is equipped for the amount of people it has. Austin's not quite there yet. It seems like it's a step behind them because so many people have moved there over the last 5 years. It's just they have to handle that amount of people. It just wasn't possible beforehand.
And you have a hillier terrain also, so installing infrastructure may take longer.
Yeah, we'll see.
So speaking of the suggestions for people who are thinking of leaving the Bay Area or maybe New York, what suggestion would you give to them, whether it's a company founder or maybe individuals who are considering of leaving those big cities? What would you suggest them to do before they make the decision?
Are you addressing that one to me or to Jonathan or both?
Both of you.
Jonathan, you want to go first on this one?
Sure, why not? Yeah, I mean, I would say I think a lot of people are in discussions to do things right now, and really you just have to do it if that's the way you want to move forward with it. Because if you just keep talking about it, it's not going to happen. So say take the plunge, make sure. I mean, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're an early stage company, you can set up places in wherever you're at. Really, you don't need to be next to your co-founder. We have co-founders who are in different countries that we've invested in before. So I mean, the world has become a much smaller place now. So as far as how you're going to adapt everything to a different state, I think it's not as big of a hurdle as most people think it is. Most people aren't even registered in California or Texas. They're probably all Delaware companies anyway. So it's not like you have to do anything with registration. All you really do is changing an address on the company page. You can still keep your employees that are in California, or you can find employees who are cheaper in Texas probably too. Or you can find employees that are across the US. It doesn't really matter where people are at nowadays. So if you're thinking about doing it, there's not really that many things holding you back. Is it the fact that income taxes are better? Is the fact that you make more money there? Your dollar goes further. I don't really see the downside to leaving it, except now you can't say you live in San Francisco. But I mean, I can fly to San Francisco anytime I want to. I can go to DFW or Austin Airport, and then it gets me there in an hour. So I mean, it's not like it's that hard to get there and do things you need to do there. And I think that the community is starting to move outside of there as well. But I know a lot of VCs in Silicon Valley would disagree with me on that point, but even the bigger VC firms are moving outside of there as well. So we'll see what happens over the next few years with that too.
With the money I'm going to save in taxes alone this year, I could take 5 to 7 trips a week long in San Francisco, airfare and hotel included, just on the tax savings. So, I mean, I agree with Jonathan wholeheartedly. It's easy to get back if you're going to do it. Take the plunge. I mean, one suggestion you might have is Airbnb is a great product, right? It exists for a reason. You can try a place out. You can Airbnb something on a long-term stay for 3 weeks or a month or 2 months and, give living there a try for a while. Rent a furnished place, experience it, see how you like it. And then you can always try something different if that one doesn't work out. So that would definitely be one of my suggestions. We didn't have that luxury during the early days of COVID. We used a broker and had someone walk around a rental property for us with an iPhone, holding an iPhone doing FaceTime, so we could look at it and then picked one. But we had been here. I guess we had the advantage that we had been here for about 5-day trip and house hunting with brokers before that. So we kind of had an idea of areas and an idea of things to look for. But I think now that the pandemic is relaxing a little bit, you could certainly Airbnb something and give something a try for a while. And I think that's always a good thing to do. Just to understand proximity to things and schools and, culture and everything else. Cultural fit is always really important for people. But I in terms of other suggestions, I really think do some economic planning. Take a look at cost of living comparisons, take a look at tax savings, take a look at what you're spending today, do your budget as if you were already living there, and then think about what you could do with all that extra money, where you could visit, what you could do, how you could vacation, what you could do to improve the overall quality of your life. And I think it's pretty easy to convince yourself that you can attain a better quality of life somewhere else these days.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I guess it's the last question. So aside from Texas, what places would you see as the next emerging hotspots for startups? Why don't we start from you this time, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good places in the U.S. popping up. I think as far as emerging, a lot of places have already kind of emerged. I've seen a lot of stuff in obviously Denver, Boulder area. You see a lot. Seattle's got a lot of cool technology happening now. I'm seeing a lot of companies in the Midwest now too. I don't see a ton of stuff in Chicago for whatever reason, but I see a lot of things in like Indianapolis, and I've seen things in Cleveland and Cincinnati before. And a lot of that comes when you see like VC firms popping up in other places. A lot of companies tend to fall where the money is too. So I like those. I like those cities. I think a lot of cool stuff's happening in Charlotte, North Carolina for some reason. I see a lot of cool things there. This is all outside of like New York, LA, and Austin, and the typical places that you usually find stuff. Miami, there's a lot of stuff there too. But I think Charlotte's a good place. I like that area. Charleston, South Carolina's got a lot of interesting technology coming out. But as far as what's becoming a hub, I mean, to me, Austin and Boulder are the two places that are just for tech are better than what's happening right now too. And they're really just going to keep growing and growing as people start to leave Silicon Valley, but want a similar lifestyle. I think that's where you'll see a lot of people flocking to over the next 10 years still. And I think Austin's already seeing that it's becoming more and more like San Francisco in a lot of ways too, both good and bad. So I think we'll start to see that even more over the next few years as well.
What about you, Josh? Do you see any other emerging or emerged places?
Yeah, I mean, emerged, right, and emerging. But I think three that I would mention that I didn't hear Jonathan mention, because he mentioned a lot. But I didn't hear Nashville, and I think that's a really hot area right now for tech. It's growing really quickly. The CIO of one of our advisory companies, she's down there, and I think it's a phenomenal place for tech startups, and large tech companies are moving there. I think another place is Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm a little biased because I'm an alumni of the University of Michigan and was in the industrial engineering school there and worked with Center for Entrepreneurship. But there's a ton of entrepreneurship in the Ann Arbor area. And I think things are really booming there. And now the automotive industry has recovered quite a bit. And I think there's a lot happening there, both in healthcare and automotive and a couple other industries. But tech as well. We have a lot of technology companies in Ann Arbor. And then the last one I would say is Minneapolis. I mean, a lot of companies are coming out of Minneapolis. It's quite amazing, but I've seen a number of tech companies getting started up there. I wouldn't have thought in such a northern and cold city, that even more cold than Ann Arbor, that it would happen, but I do see a lot happening there. The Twin Cities are booming. Those are the three places that I have experienced myself, some companies that are growing, worked with some entrepreneurs that I know, and I think things are really happening. Of course, all the ones Jonathan mentioned as well, and some international locations. Mexico's got some interesting things happening. Costa Rica has some really interesting things happening in the tech startup world. And so, I think you can look near and outside the US and find some things happening. Canada, Vancouver has some interesting things happening. And, you know, even in Quebec a little bit now. So Toronto for sure, but that's always been there. And I think there's just a lot of spread of entrepreneurship. I feel like when I was a young entrepreneur, it was like, you're that crazy person that decided to start a business instead of go get a job. And now entrepreneurship is a celebrated activity that is just starting to emerge in all kinds of cities and places that were previously not thought about at all.
Well, thanks for sharing this insight with us, with our audience, and these are very great ones. And before I let you go, I have a last request, which is to have each of you to give the audience 3 words to describe how you're feeling now. Don't overthink. It has to be the first 3 words that pops up in your mind right now. We start from you, Josh.
Optimistic, engaged, and happy.
Thanks. What about you, Jonathan?
Hopeful on this. I was going to say optimistic as well. And just cautious with COVID, I'd say still. So there's a little cautious optimism. I just want to see what happens with everything still too. We're proceeding as if things are moving along right now, but we'll see what happens over the next 6 months. Still, we have no idea where things are going to be. And I mean, a year ago today, we were all stuck inside. So, I mean, a lot of people in California still are too. So we'll see what happens.
Well, thank you. Thanks again for both of you for spending time with us today, and best luck with everything. And hopefully see you next demo week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you.